I got one question. Why does PC love to lie so damn much? Especially when it comes to our icons and our legends and our black leaders of yesteryears, especially when it comes to Dr. King. I think that Joe Rogan has put out one of the most idiotic, ridiculous, and as far as I'm concerned, anti-black stances when it comes to Dr. King and trying to bastardize this man's image and his name, as well as his thought process. So on this article that I'm going to be reading from News One, I kid you not, this is what the title reads. Joe Rogan falsely claims Martin Luther King was quote-unquote colorblind during an anti-quote-unquote wokeness rant. Now, we know that could not be further from the truth because Martin Luther King, Dr. King, knew exactly who he was. He knew he was a black man. He knew what he was dealing with. He knew he was dealing with racism, white supremacy, especially during the civil rights movement and in the height of Jim Crow. Joe Rogan, you are a piece of shit for even uttering those words. I mean, you was already that before. We already knew that. But now you really are, you should be on black people's radar for even uttering those words. Joe Rogan, the podcast messiah for incels, quote-unquote fake alpha males, pseudo-intellectuals, and white men who appear to be completely unaware of their neckbeards, has long been a contributor to the chorus line of aggrieved white people who don't really know what wokeness is, but know that they hate it. That statement right there, especially about them not knowing what woke is, but claim that they hate it, sort of like what Bethany Mandel did and got embarrassed by Breonna Joy Gray back in March on the Hill. Now he's joined the colorblind club of Caucasians, and I like how the person wrote this. They put colorblind and they spell color with a K, of Caucasians who only know one line from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech, but still insist on preaching the whitewash version of his legacy to anyone who seeks to educate America on race. Recently, Rogan took to his podcast to whine about a California school hiring someone to teach children about racism because, like other white people, he can't seem to imagine an age-appropriate way to teach about anti-racism, and instead imagines members of the Black Panther Party lining white kids up against the wall to beat the neo-Nazi out of them one by one. They hired someone to teach them that they have to be anti-racist and it's not good enough to be racist. What? My kids aren't racist at all. Why are you putting that into their head that they have to be anti-racist and call out racism? Rogan said. He went on to decry anti-racism as woke, guilt-ridden ideology. See, like I said, it's getting to see what I said, and I don't know if it was me that said it or if it was maybe Blacklight Revelations or maybe Kid Gravity. It was one of us who said that's what it is for them. Whenever we call out anti-blackness or racism and white supremacy, they automatically claim it to be quote-unquote woke. This is exactly why I and Harvey over at Your World keep telling people stop worrying about what other people got going on and only focus on us, because they don't care. So why should we? Joe Rogan has basically told you out of his own mouth that, you know, we don't care, we shouldn't care about them, so we're going to push back against them, and we're going to take a word that black people came up with, we're going to twist it like a pretzel and bastardize the hell out of it and throw it back at them as a deflection, so whenever they call something out that should be rightfully called out, we can say, well, no, that's woke. But then we turn right back around and tell them to define it, and they can't, or they'll give us these off the wall random whatevers that absolutely make no sense. It says he went on to decry anti-racism as a woke, guilt-ridden ideology before proving that he doesn't understand history any better than he understands how racism and whiteness actually work or operate. Our goal should always been the goals the liberals had in the 60s and 70s, which is a colorblind society, he said. I don't think they had a colorblind society back then. If you're talking about the 60s, Jim Crow, which part of the 60s? Because Jim Crow was still very much going on. Jim Crow wasn't like really out of the way until the late 60s. It was still very much active. And in the 70s, while Jim Crow was most likely gone, the ideology of Jim Crow was still very much there because it hadn't been quote unquote gone for that long. Shoot, it's still here today if you want to be technical. He goes on to say the Martin Luther King notion that we should treat people by the content of the character, here we go, not the color of their skin. None of the real problems get addressed, and instead they just try to make kids feel guilty. See, again, they are only doing this to protect the how can I put it, the quote unquote innocence of white children. That's really all it boils down to. Just like Ron the Snowflake down there in Florida, all he does is just talk about, oh, let's just protect the innocence of white children while they continue to go out there and be anti-black. Let's keep in mind what Ryan Palmer down in Florida did back in August, slaughtering 3 black people at a Dollar General. Let's remind people what Peyton Gendron did at a Tops grocery store in Buffalo last May, or what Dylan Roof did, or a host of others. And all of these individuals were in their late teens to early 20s when they committed the acts in which they did, which was steeped in anti-blackness. But Joe Rogan will have you to believe that we should be talking about how we live in a colorblind society because allegedly that's what Dr. King said, even though he did not say that or believe that we did. Any black person who is of sound mind knows we do not live in a colorblind society. That is that PC people shit who believes that, and they know, and they don't believe it either. Because if that was the case, why did Dylan Roof see color? Why did Ryan Palmer see color? And why did Peyton Gendron see color? And the color they saw was black, 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 because that's who they targeted and that's who they executed. Nobody else, black. They knew what they were doing and they knew who their intended target was, and they executed said targets, unfortunately. And then you still have people out there who are attempting to do and commit these kind of violent acts against black people, even still to this day, even if their targets don't get hit. Do y'all remember the one I did about the man in Pittsburgh? Like literally the day after what Ryan Palmer did, he attempted to go and massacre people inside of a black church, but he was not successful. When you factor in everything that I just said, Joe Rogan, you and I both know we do not live in a goddamn colorblind society. You know how many times I should say you tell yourself that we do. I don't believe it, and you don't believe it either. And again, it's all about comforting white kids' feelings. It goes on to say, first of all, Rogan wasn't so colorblind when he noticed a neighborhood in Philadelphia was full of black people and referred to that neighborhood as the Planet of the Apes. I remember that now. I forgot, but I remember when he said that. He wasn't so colorblind when he declared that because of the spectrum of shades of people, the only people who should be considered black are those who are 100% African from the darkest place where they are not wearing any clothes all day and they have developed all of that melanin to protect themselves from the sun. But yeah, we should be shocked from a white man whose bulbous head is filled to the brim with racist stereotypes is against anti-racism learning and education. Anyway, Bernice King, MLK's daughter, responded to Rogan by once again reminding white people that they don't actually know anything about who her father was. I'm gonna read to you what she said. Sharing again that my father was not advocating for a colorblind society. Please stop taking one line from one speech in which he also talked about police brutality and reparations to make it seem as though his dream was void of work, like teaching history and eradicating racism. White people must get tired of sticking their heads in the sand whenever black people point out that MLK never advocated for colorblindness and actually had plenty of disparaging things to say about American whites. And here's one of the quotes right here. It says, whites, it must be frankly be said, are not putting in a similar mass effort to re-educate themselves out of their racial ignorance. It is an aspect of a sense of superiority that the white people of America believe they have so little to learn. And that was a quote from Dr. King in 1967. and I'm kind of scrolling down right here and to see what else people are saying, is not only was MLK acutely aware of whiteness, white supremacy, and everything else white people now call woke, but he was unapologetic in talking about how white folk have demonstrated eloquently that they don't have no sense. But let's be real. It's not about colorblindness, because if it were, white conservatives, including Rogan, wouldn't suddenly fail to unsee color when it comes to the subject of diversity and inclusion initiatives. And it's not about indoctrination either. If it were, Rogan would also use his platform to decry things like Florida's approval of teaching that slaves benefited from slavery, a curriculum that has been proven to be based on inaccurate information and is inherently racist. When it comes right down to it, it's not even about eradicating wokeness. It's about preserving the bubble of whiteness. And that last line that that person wrote is exactly what it is. It's about preserving white supremacy. And they will do anything to do it, even bastardize our icons, which they've been doing with Dr. King probably ever since they created a day for him back in the 80s in the Reagan administration, during the Reagan era. It's probably been going back all the way back to then. Give it some time and give it some years, and I hope I'm not jinxing myself when I say this. They gonna try to portray Dr. King as a white man probably in the future. They probably wish that they could, but see, the thing is, a lot of our leaders, they probably wish that they could, because what leaders do they have? And the leaders that they did have was steeped in anti-blackness. So it would look silly if they tried to do it, because then they'll go against what they're trying to push. Joe Rogan knows he is an idiot talking about, oh, Dr. King advocated for a colorblind society, or he believed in colorblind society, or whatever nonsense he said. Dr. King did not advocate for that, and that just shows you how uninformed he is, how willfully uninformed, I should say, he is when it comes to Dr. King. And we're not surprised, because people of his ilk tend to always do that when it comes to Dr. King. They love to bastardize this man's image and his memory and his speeches, quite for that matter. Like his daughter said, they never talk about the full speech. She said they don't talk about the police brutality part, and they don't talk about the reparations part, because he did say we was coming to get our check. They dare not talk about that. Let's talk about why Dr. King was taken out, because it was everything after that speech. They said, oh, we got to get rid of him. He's getting too radical. He's getting like that ex fella. You know, the one that we took out a couple years ago. So yeah, Joe Rogan is full of it, but we're not shocked, nor are we surprised by it. But we got to call this out, because they're distorting this man's memory and banking that this is the memory that whatever memory they can create of him is the one that they want to get out there to the masses and make sure it stays out there. They want this narrative that Joe Rogan is pushing out there to be the actual narrative itself of who Dr. King was. And because Joe Rogan has this massive podcast with a lot of people, and he has influence, whether you like him or not, he does have influence. There's somebody out there that probably doesn't know who Dr. King is, who's going to hang off of this man's every word as if anything and everything that he's saying is the 100% gospel truth, and it is not. So we got to get in front of this before it spreads like wildfire.